June 19, 1944. Wait 47 hours. Philippine Sea, 140 miles west of Saipan. The morning sun cast long shadows across the Pacific swells as Lieutenant Commander Saburo Sakai rolled his Mitsubishi A6M0 into a steep dive. The familiar whine of his Nakajima engine filling the cramped cockpit with its reassuring song. Below him, the blue expanse of the Philippine Sea stretched endlessly toward the horizon, while above, scattered cumulus clouds provided perfect cover for the aerial ambush he had executed countless times before. This was his element, his domain, the vast Pacific theater where the Zero had reigned supreme for nearly 3 years, where Japanese naval aviation had carved out an empire stretching from the Aleutians to the Solomon Islands. But as Sakai's experienced eyes swept the sky ahead, searching for the familiar silhouettes of American wildcats and dauntless dive bombers, what he saw instead would shatter forever the mythology of Japanese air superiority. Emerging from a cloud bank at 12,000 feet, came not the stubby, underpowered fighters he had grown accustomed to outmaneuvering and destroying, but sleek, powerful machines that moved through the air with a predatory grace that spoke of technological revolution. The Grumman F6F Hellcat had arrived in the Pacific in overwhelming numbers, and with it came the death knell of everything Sakai and his fellow pilots had believed about their invincibility in aerial combat. The roar of twin-row Pratt and Whitney R-2800 engines filled the morning air as a squadron of Hellcats dove toward the Japanese formation with devastating precision. These were not the desperate, outmatched American pilots of 1942, struggling with inferior equipment and inadequate training. These were the products of a democratic industrial machine operating at full capacity, flying aircraft that represented the pinnacle of American engineering, achievement and the unlimited productive potential of a free society, mobilized for total war. The transformation of American naval aviation from the dark days of Pearl Harbor to the technological supremacy represented by the Hellcat constitutes one of the most remarkable stories of the Pacific War. In December 1941, Japanese naval aviation had stood without equal in the world, its pilots the most experienced and skilled in existence, its aircraft perfectly adapted to long-range Pacific operations. The Mitsubishi A6M0, with its exceptional range, maneuverability, and climb rate, had swept Allied opposition from the skies across half the Pacific, enabling the rapid conquest of the Dutch East Indies, the Philippines, and much of the Solomon Islands chain. The Zero's dominance rested not merely on superior engineering, but on a philosophy of aerial combat that prioritized agility and range over pilot protection and structural strength. Japanese aircraft designers had created fighters that could turn inside any opponent, climb faster than any contemporary design, and operate at ranges that seemed impossible to American tacticians. The trade-offs were significant: minimal armor protection, unprotected fuel tanks, limited ammunition capacity, but in the hands of superbly trained pilots with years of combat experience, these compromises seemed irrelevant. Lieutenant Commander Sakai himself embodied the pinnacle of this system. A veteran of the China conflict with over 200 confirmed victories, he had helped develop the tactics and techniques that had made Japanese naval aviation the terror of the Pacific. His Zero bore the scars of countless engagements, its aluminum skin patched and repatched, its engine worn smooth by thousands of hours of combat flying. Like the aircraft he flew, Sakai represented an investment in human capital that the Japanese Empire could no longer afford to replace. For by June 1944, the elite cadre of Japanese naval aviators who had won the early victories of the Pacific War had been largely destroyed in the grinding campaigns of Midway, Guadalcanal, and the Solomon Islands. The men who had learned their trade in the skies over China, who had perfected their skills in years of peacetime training, who had absorbed the warrior ethos of Bushido until it became as natural as breathing. These irreplaceable assets had been expended in battles that Japan could not afford to lose. What remained were hastily trained replacements flying aircraft that, despite continuous modification and improvement, were fundamentally obsolete in the face of American technological advancement. The F6F Hellcat, that now dominated the morning sky over the Philippine Sea, represented everything that Japanese military philosophy had dismissed as impossible or irrelevant. Where the Zero prioritized agility at the expense of durability, the Hellcat combined maneuverability with unprecedented structural strength. Where Japanese designers had sacrificed pilot protection for performance, Grumman engineers had created an aircraft that could absorb tremendous damage and still bring its pilot home alive. Where the Zero carried limited ammunition for weight considerations, the Hellcat mounted 650 caliber machine guns with ammunition loads that allowed sustained combat engagement. Most importantly, the Hellcat represented the full mobilization of American industrial capacity in service of technological superiority. The aircraft that Sakai now faced had rolled off production lines in Long Island factories, where democratic capitalism had been harnessed to the requirements of total war. Grumman Aircraft Corporation, under the leadership of engineers like William Schwendler and Jake Swerble, had designed and produced a fighter that incorporated lessons learned from every previous aerial engagement, improvements suggested by combat pilots, and manufacturing techniques that allowed mass production without sacrifice of quality. The numbers alone told the story of American abundance applied to warfare. By June 1944, Grumman had delivered over 8,000 Hellcats to the U.S. Navy and Marine Corps, with production reaching 600 aircraft per month at peak output. Each Hellcat represented not just superior engineering, but the coordinated efforts of thousands of American workers, from the aluminum refineries of Pennsylvania to the precision instrument manufacturers of Connecticut. The pilot facing Sakai across the morning sky flew an aircraft that embodied the productive capacity of an entire continental economy, mobilized for victory. The psychological impact on Japanese pilots encountering the Hellcat for the first time was immediate and devastating. Men who had spent years dominating aerial combat suddenly found themselves outmatched not just tactically, but technologically. The Hellcat could dive faster than the Zero, climb more rapidly at high altitude, and absorb damage that would have destroyed any Japanese aircraft. More troubling still, American pilots were employing tactics that took full advantage of their aircraft's superiority, abandoning the turning fights where the Zero's agility could be decisive in favor of high-speed attacks that maximized the Hellcat's strengths. Petty Officer Hiroshi Nishizawa, Japan's leading ace with over 100 confirmed victories, described his first encounter with Hellcats in terms that revealed the depth of Japanese shock at American technological advancement. "These new American fighters moved through the air like sharks through water," he wrote in a letter to his commander that was later captured and translated by Allied intelligence. "They attacked with a coordination and purpose that suggested not just superior training, but complete confidence in their equipment. We found ourselves fighting not individual pilots, but manifestations of an industrial machine that seemed capable of endless production. The transformation was visible not just in aircraft performance, but in pilot quality and tactical sophistication. The Americans flying Hellcats in 1944 were products of a training system that had learned from early defeats and adapted with remarkable speed. Unlike the Japanese, who were forced to rush barely trained pilots into combat as replacements for irreplaceable losses, the United States had established comprehensive training programs that produced aviators thoroughly familiar with their equipment and well-versed in tactics, specifically designed to exploit their technological advantages. The pilot training facilities scattered across the American South and West represented another manifestation of democratic abundance applied to military necessity. Fields in Florida, Texas, and California processed thousands of potential aviators through programs that would have been impossible for resource-constrained Japan to duplicate. American flight training consumed fuel, aircraft, and time in quantities that Japanese planners could barely comprehend. Yet this apparent waste produced pilots who arrived in combat theaters with hundreds of hours of flight, time and thorough familiarity with their equipment. The contrast with Japanese training methods was stark and telling. By 1944, fuel shortages had reduced Japanese pilot training to minimal flight time, often less than 100 hours before assignment to combat units. New pilots arrived at frontline squadrons with theoretical knowledge of their aircraft, but little practical experience in the demanding art of aerial combat. The sophisticated air-to-air gunnery that had made early Japanese pilots so deadly required years to master, but Japan no longer possessed the luxury of time, fuel, or experienced instructors necessary for such comprehensive training. Lieutenant Commander Sakai, engaging his first Hellcat over the Philippine Sea, immediately recognized that he faced not just a superior aircraft, but a pilot whose training and experience represented resources that Japan could no longer match. The American pilots' attacks were coordinated with wingmen who maintained formation discipline while maximizing their aircraft's performance characteristics. Their gunnery was accurate, their tactics sophisticated, their equipment maintenance clearly superior to anything Japanese logistics could provide in 1944. The F6F Hellcat itself had become a symbol of American technological and industrial supremacy, but it represented something more profound than mere mechanical superiority. The aircraft embodied a philosophical approach to warfare that differed fundamentally from Japanese concepts of combat. Where Japanese military thought emphasized spiritual purity, individual heroism, and acceptance of death as the ultimate expression of loyalty, American military philosophy prioritized technological advantage, systematic training, and the preservation of trained personnel as irreplaceable assets. This difference in approach was visible in every aspect of Hellcat design and deployment. The aircraft's robust construction, self-sealing fuel tanks, and pilot armor reflected a democratic society's commitment to preserving the lives of its citizens even in the midst of total war. The sophisticated radio equipment that allowed coordinated attacks represented an industrial base capable of producing complex electronics in massive quantities. The standardized maintenance procedures that kept Hellcats operational at forward bases demonstrated logistical capabilities that Japanese forces could no longer match. The Battle of the Philippine Sea, which came to be known among American pilots as the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot, marked the definitive end of Japanese naval aviation as an effective fighting force. On June 19th and 20th, 1944, American carrier-based aircraft destroyed over 400 Japanese planes while losing only 29 of their own. The Hellcat accounted for the vast majority of Japanese losses, demonstrating kill ratios that would have seemed impossible just 2 years earlier. Sakai himself survived the engagement, but his zero bore damage that would have been fatal in any previous model of aerial combat. American .50 caliber bullets had shredded his aircraft's unprotected control surfaces, punctured his fuel tank, and destroyed his radio equipment. Only his exceptional skill and years of combat experience allowed him to nurse the damaged fighter back to his carrier, where he reported to his squadron commander that Japanese naval aviation faced complete technological obsolescence. The Americans have not simply improved their aircraft, Sakai reported in a debriefing that was later discovered in captured Japanese naval archives. They have revolutionized the entire concept of aerial warfare. Their new fighters combine speed, firepower, and durability in ways that make our tactics obsolete and our aircraft inadequate. More troubling still, they appear to possess these new fighters in unlimited quantities, while we struggle to replace losses with inferior substitutes. The industrial statistics behind American Hellcat production revealed the full scope of democratic mobilization for total war. Grumman's Long Island facility employed over 25,000 workers at peak production, operating around the clock to meet Navy requirements. The company's engineering staff continuously incorporated improvements suggested by combat experience, resulting in aircraft that became more effective with each production batch. Subcontractors across the American industrial base contributed components, from engines manufactured by Pratt & Whitney in Connecticut to instruments produced by dozens of smaller firms, scattered across the continent. This distributed production system represented a fundamental advantage that totalitarian regimes could not match. German and Japanese war production relied heavily on centralized facilities that were vulnerable to bombing attacks and resource shortages. American production was dispersed across a continental economy that could absorb tremendous damage while continuing to function effectively. The Hellcat embodied this strategic advantage, with components sourced from suppliers who were themselves part of a vast network of democratic capitalism mobilized for victory. The psychological impact of the Hellcat's dominance extended far beyond its immediate tactical effects. For Japanese pilots who had built their entire professional identity around the superiority of their aircraft and tactics, encounters with American technological supremacy represented a fundamental challenge to their worldview. Many experienced aviators began to question not just their equipment, but the entire imperial ideology that had justified years of sacrifice and struggle. The transformation of Japanese pilot attitudes was documented in captured diaries, letters and interrogation reports that revealed the depth of demoralization among surviving aviators. Men who had once expressed absolute confidence in eventual Japanese victory began to write of their doubts about the empire's capacity to match American industrial production. The daily appearance of new Hellcats, apparently in unlimited quantities, contrasted sharply with Japanese squadrons that struggled to maintain operational aircraft due to part shortages and maintenance difficulties. Petty Officer First Class Tetsuzo Iwamoto, Japan's second leading ace, captured the mood of many veteran pilots in a diary entry written after his first encounter with Hellcats. "Today I witnessed the future of this war, and it belongs to America. Their new fighters are not just superior to our aircraft, they represent a level of industrial capacity that we cannot hope to match. Each enemy plane I see overhead represents resources, technology, and manufacturing capability that our empire simply does not possess. We are fighting not just American pilots, but the entire productive capacity of a continental democracy, and we are losing." The technical specifications of the F6F Hellcat told the story of American engineering excellence applied to the specific requirements of Pacific aerial warfare. The aircraft's Pratt & Whitney R2800 double WASP engine produced 2,000 horsepower, nearly double that of the Zero's power plant. This advantage translated into superior performance at high altitude, faster climb rates, and the ability to dictate the terms of engagement through superior speed and power. The Hellcat could choose when to fight and when to disengage, tactical options that were not available to Japanese pilots flying less powerful aircraft. The Hellcat's armament represented another manifestation of American abundance applied to military necessity. 650 caliber machine guns, each loaded with 400 rounds of ammunition, provided firepower that dwarfed anything available to Japanese pilots. The M2 Browning machine guns mounted in Hellcat wings could destroy enemy aircraft with brief bursts, while Japanese pilots flying Zeros were limited to two 20mm cannon with minimal ammunition loads and 4 light machine guns of limited effectiveness. Perhaps most importantly, the Hellcat incorporated design features that reflected democratic values applied to military technology. The aircraft's robust construction, redundant systems, and pilot protection represented a society's commitment to preserving the lives of its fighting men. Self-sealing fuel tanks, armor plating around vital components, and structural strength that allowed the aircraft to survive damage that would destroy. Lighter designs, these features embodied the American belief that individual lives possessed inherent value that justified significant resource expenditure. The contrast with Japanese design philosophy could not have been more stark. The Zero's light construction, minimal protection, and emphasis on maneuverability over durability reflected a military culture that viewed pilot death as acceptable, even honorable, in service to the emperor. American aircraft designers worked under different assumptions, creating fighters that prioritized pilot survival and mission completion over abstract concepts of martial purity. The training of American Hellcat pilots represented another dimension of democratic abundance that Japanese forces could not match. By 1944, typical Navy and Marine Corps aviators arrived at combat assignments with over 600 hours of flight time, extensive gunnery training, and thorough familiarity with their aircraft's capabilities and limitations. This level of preparation was possible only because American training facilities had access to unlimited fuel, spare aircraft, and instructional resources that Japanese training programs could no longer afford. The Advanced Flight Training Program, established at facilities like Pensacola Naval Air Station, consumed resources at rates that would have been impossible for resource-constrained Japan to sustain. American student pilots practiced air-to-air gunnery with live ammunition, flew formation flights that burned thousands of gallons of aviation fuel, and received individualized instruction that ensured thorough mastery of complex combat techniques. This systematic approach to pilot development reflected a society wealthy enough to invest heavily in human capital development. By contrast, Japanese pilot training had been reduced to minimal flight time and theoretical instruction that could not replace the practical experience necessary for aerial combat effectiveness. New pilots arrived at frontline units with barely enough flight time to handle their aircraft safely, much less engage in the sophisticated aerial combat that characterized Pacific theater operations. The result was a steady degradation in pilot quality that no amount of martial spirit could compensate for when facing technologically superior opponents. The logistics of maintaining Hellcat squadrons in forward areas represented another manifestation of American industrial and organizational superiority. The complex supply chains that kept fighters operational thousands of miles from manufacturing centers demonstrated logistical capabilities that Japanese forces could no longer match. Spare parts, ammunition, fuel, and specialized maintenance equipment flowed across the Pacific in quantities that ensured consistent aircraft availability rates that amazed Japanese intelligence analysts. The mobile repair facilities that accompanied American carrier task forces represented technological solutions to maintenance problems that Japanese forces solved through improvisation and cannibalization. American squadron maintenance crews operated with specialized tools, comprehensive parts inventories, and technical manuals that reflected systematic approaches to complex mechanical problems. Japanese maintenance crews, by contrast, often worked with improvised tools and salvaged parts in attempts to keep obsolescent aircraft operational under increasingly difficult conditions. Lieutenant Commander Sakai's final combat mission came in October 1944, when his damaged Zero was finally declared beyond repair, after months of improvised maintenance using salvaged components. His squadron had been reduced from 24 aircraft to fewer than 6 operational fighters, while American carrier task forces operated with aircraft availability rates that consistently exceeded 80%. The contrast spoke volumes about the different industrial and logistical capabilities of the opposing forces. "We are no longer fighting a war," Sakai confided to his diary in his final entry before being reassigned to training duties. "We are witnessing the application of unlimited industrial resources to the systematic destruction of our fighting capacity." The American Hellcat has become not just a superior fighter aircraft, but a symbol of technological and productive capabilities that we cannot hope to match. Each enemy aircraft represents not just superior engineering, but the coordinated efforts of an entire continental economy dedicated to our defeat. The impact of the Hellcat extended beyond immediate tactical considerations to influence the broader strategic balance in the Pacific theater. American naval aviation, equipped with technologically superior aircraft and supported by comprehensive logistics systems, achieved air superiority that enabled the systematic destruction of Japanese defensive positions across the Central Pacific. The island-hopping campaign that characterized American strategy in 1944 and 1945 was possible only because Hellcat squadrons could establish and maintain air superiority over increasingly powerful Japanese defensive installations. The psychological warfare dimension of Hellcat operations proved as important as their tactical effectiveness. The daily appearance of American fighters over Japanese positions, apparently in unlimited quantities and with complete tactical superiority, undermined Japanese morale and reinforced the growing perception that American industrial capacity was indeed unlimited. Japanese forces, accustomed to operating with minimal air cover and inadequate supplies, confronted an enemy that seemed capable of endless production and systematic replacement of losses. The F6F Hellcat accumulated a combat record that spoke eloquently of American technological and tactical superiority. By war's end, Hellcat pilots had achieved a kill ratio of 19.1 against Japanese aircraft, destroying over 5,200 enemy planes while losing fewer than 300 of their own. These statistics reflected not just superior equipment, but comprehensive advantages in pilot training, tactical doctrine, maintenance support, and logistical sustainability that demonstrated the full mobilization of democratic society for total war. The end of Japanese naval aviation as an effective fighting force came not through a single decisive battle, but through the cumulative effect of technological obsolescence and resource exhaustion. The Hellcat, as the primary instrument of American air superiority, represented the victory of democratic abundance over totalitarian sacrifice, of systematic industrial production over improvised military solutions, of technological sophistication over martial ideology. The final irony of the Hellcat's dominance lay in its very existence as a product of the democratic society that Japanese propaganda had dismissed as soft, decadent, and incapable of sustained sacrifice. The aircraft that destroyed Japanese air power had been designed by civilian engineers, manufactured by civilian workers, and deployed by pilots trained in facilities that consumed resources at rates that would have been impossible for more regimented societies to sustain. Democracy had proven not weak but incredibly strong, not wasteful but ultimately efficient, not chaotic but systematically effective in the application of collective will to military necessity. As the war drew to its inevitable conclusion, surviving Japanese pilots like Sakai found themselves confronting not just military defeat, but the collapse of an entire worldview that had sustained them through years of combat and sacrifice. The Hellcat had become more than a superior fighter aircraft. It had become a symbol of everything their ideology had taught them to despise about democratic society, only to discover that it actually represented everything they had been fighting against. The notion that individual lives possessed value worth protecting, that technological innovation could substitute for human sacrifice, and that free societies could mobilize resources more effectively than totalitarian regimes. The blue Pacific that had once seemed the natural domain of Japanese naval aviation now belonged to American carrier task forces operating with confidence born of technological supremacy and industrial abundance. The F6F Hellcat, with its distinctive bent-wing silhouette and powerful radial engine, had become the symbol of that transformation, a manifestation of democratic values translated into engineering excellence and deployed with the systematic efficiency that only free societies seemed capable of achieving when confronted with existential threats to their survival and their ideals.